Hello, I'm super excited to be speaking to you today about a topic which is really dear to my heart, and that is the very unknown relationship between addiction and connection. So, when you think about addiction, most people think about drugs, alcohol, criminal activities of sorts, and usually maybe some guilt or shame, right? People pointing fingers, a feeling of helplessness, etc., etc. And when I understood that addiction is not really a question of a flaw of character, it really allowed me to give myself a lot of grace as well as to other people as well. So let's start with broadening the scope of what an addiction could be. So you all know the famous Tony Robbins, who talks about the six universal needs. And the six universal needs are none other than a need for certainty, a need for variety or uncertainty, a need for significance, a need for love or connection, a need for growth, and a need for contribution. And what unites us universally, according to Tony Robbins, is that we all have needs. And what will differentiate us, on the other hand, is the way in which we understand that those needs are satisfied. Now, what's very important to understand as well is that he says that if there's any activity that satisfies three or more of those needs, it becomes an addiction. So imagine that you love to travel, right? So traveling, for example, could satisfy your need for variety, right? It could also satisfy your need for growth, right? And then it could satisfy your need for connection with people and just meeting people, etc., etc. I could go on. What if you love beautiful, yummy cakes? That could satisfy your need for variety. If you're having a variety of them, it could satisfy your need for certainty, knowing that this is going to be a good fix when you feel stressed, right? And it could also satisfy a need for connection and bonding. And I'll explain that in a few minutes. So I want us to really tune into what addiction really is. So in the early 20th century, rats were put in cages and they were given two bottles of water. One bottle was laced with heroin and the other bottle was just water. And it was found that invariably the rats would go for the bottle that was laced with heroin and unfortunately overdose and die. In the 1970s, Professor Alexander thought, hang on a minute. Yes, the rats were overdosing, but however, these rats were in isolation. They were by themselves in these cages. And so he said he was going to build a rat heaven. So a cage basically in which there were lots of activities, lots of things to stimulate the rats, lots of other rats to interact with as well. And what was found, the rats in those cages, in those environments, were no longer preferring the water that was laced with heroin. They were going for the normal water, and there was no overdose in those particular environments. And people then said, okay, that's nice, but maybe it's just that these are rats. How about humans? At the same time, there was the Vietnamese War. And about 20% of the US soldiers in Vietnam were using heroin heavily. So there was a real concern that when they came back to the United States, they would be junkies. And so they were followed. And what people found was surprising. They just stopped using heroin. What was the difference? They were home. They were connected. They were in environments where they were loved and cherished and respected and all of these things. So what you want to really understand is that we humans are built to bond and to connect. And when we are unable to do so because we're traumatized or for whatever reason, somebody is not allowing us to do that because we're in isolation, for example, then we will find something to bond with. And that bond could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be food, it could be sex, it could be work, it could be your phone, it could be shopping, it could be anything. However, what will happen, what assures you will bond, which is why it is so important to pay attention to your environment. Connection is essential. By saying, I don't have time to connect, you are depriving yourself of a basic human need. And by doing so, you are depriving yourself of one of the essential aspects or factors that will allow you perform at your peak. And when I think of connection, I don't only think of connection with others. That is important. Many of us, however, are disconnected not only from others, but also from ourselves. We no longer are aware of, listen to, acknowledge, or respect what our inner hearts have to say. We've stopped listening. We're so in our heads, so in the have to in order to get something, that we no longer listen to, how does this make me feel? Is this aligned with who I am? Is this aligned with my purpose? And when we disconnect from ourselves, we are surely going to disconnect from others. So how do you disconnect with yourself again, you may ask? How do you remember? How do you rekindle your beautiful, phenomenal essence so that you can see that essence, be with that essence, be your essence, magnify it? And one of the really beautiful tips I have is to be with yourself, to give yourself me time. Just as when you want to connect with a good friend or with a family member, you create time for them, space for them so you can connect, you get to create space for yourself. And to do so without guilt, without shame, without feeling that you're being selfish. Because the more you are able to acknowledge yourself and create space for yourself and time for yourself, the more you'll be able to create that time and space for others from a space of generosity and power, as opposed from a space of being a martyr, having to do it, wanting to look good, not wanting to upset others, which is a scarcity mindset. And I want you to watch as well. Practice connection this week. Find something for yourself that lights you up. Start practicing that this week. Is it drawing? Is it painting? Is it going for a walk? Is it listening to music? Is it dancing? Whatever lights you up, whatever it is. And also find an activity you can do with one person or two people that you truly love. Make it easy, make it breezy, make it joyful. And note how you feel less of a need to do certain things that were beginning to feel like addictions. Love and light. Connect with me if you'd like to talk more about this. I'd love, love, love to really, really dive into this on a discovery call with you so that you can truly understand the power of rekindling your phenomenal essence, as opposed to approaching life from a space where you've given all your power to everything outside of yourself. That is what leads to burnout, and I don't wish it on anyone. Love and light. Take care.